Broadband Breakfast Live Online for Wednesday, February 1st, 2023. I'm Drew Clark, editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast. Happy to welcome you the first day of the second month of this year. It's still in the new year, where we're going to talk about some of the issues, particularly before Congress, but also in general, right? What are the broadband and tech policy issues that the Congress, as well as our country, will be facing. I'm joined by an awesome panel of key decision makers in the broadband and technology industries here in Washington. I'll be introducing them just now. But before I do so, I want to just say a couple words about Broadband Breakfast. Appropriately, I've got my Illinois painting here of my breakfast meal back in the dining room background. But Broadband Breakfast, we actually began because we met for breakfast right at Clyde's of Gallery Place in Washington, D.C. And that really kicked off this 15-year journey where we are now the leading publication focused on better broadband, better lives, getting high quality infrastructure and making sure that the people in this country have the tools to make use of that infrastructure. Along the way, we focused on the policy and technology issues that arise and come up. We focus on things like telework, telemedicine, privacy, net neutrality, even issues around big tech, and Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act is huge right now. And these issues together form, the panoply of the issues that our internet infrastructure relies upon and needs. Not everyone on our panel will necessarily have opinions on all these topics, but this panel is really the key people focused on what I, again, like to say is better broadband, better lives. I also want to just highlight the upcoming events we're going to be having. We are here every Wednesday, 12 noon Eastern time. Set your clock. Remind to come back here and join this program, this free program. Next Wednesday, we're going to be talking about the Build America, Buy America Act, okay, and what the provisions mean for infrastructure deployment here in the United States. On the 15th, we're going to talk about state broadband offices. They were a crucial component in this next phase of broadband infrastructure. On the 22nd, we're going to be talking about workforce development issues, which we may touch upon here. We'll see. And then on March the 1st, a month from today, we're going to be previewing our Big Tech and Speech Summit, okay? And this is the first full-length conference we've done on this topic. We do our annual digital infrastructure investment every year. We're going to be doing another broadband infrastructure conference in June. But March 9th, we'll be focused on what Silicon Valley is doing in light of the current climate in Washington, what the speech issues and content moderation issues are surrounding the tech platforms. We'll talk about privacy. We'll also talk about competition and innovation. You can learn more about the program. Go to the conferences link on broadbandbreakfast.com, and you can register to attend. The event is $299. You can also, if you're a member of our Broadband Breakfast Club, you'll get a $60 discount off that. It comes with breakfast and lunch. What else? At Clyde's of Gallery Place, and all of the video access to these conferences, just like we did at our Digital Infrastructure Investment Conference. Those who attended received 2 months of complimentary admission to the Broadband Breakfast Club. And speaking of the Broadband Breakfast Club, we release a special report every month. Last month, January, it was focused on the broadband mapping and challenges to the broadband map. This month, later this week, Thursday or Friday, we'll be releasing our special report on the Build America, Buy America Act and how you navigate the provisions of it. So the Broadband Breakfast Club, the place where you can get more out of Broadband Breakfast, it's available for $99 a month. And again, you get many benefits and discounts. Go to the membership tab, or I guess that's what it's called, at the top of Broadband Breakfast site, and you can learn more about the program. All right, with that, let us, one final announcement I need to make. I want to give a shout out to the sponsors of the Broadband Breakfast Club. We wouldn't be able to do the free programming like this, as well as the free reporting. 99% of our content is available for free, no paywall, without the support of our sponsors. Utopia Fiber, Broadband.money, Google Fiber, Broadband Now, Lightbox, the Wireless Infrastructure Association, Geo Partners, Ookla, Michael Baker International, Pinpoint Capital Advisors, Bitstream Communications, Positron Access, the California Emerging Technology Fund, and broadbandtoolkit.com. Thank you, sponsors, for your help in your role in making our programming so accessible to so many. All right, thanks for patience. Now, let's go ahead and turn it over to our panel. I'm going to highlight the view. If you're not one of the panelists, just make sure to keep your video and your audio off. We really just have a great group that's here with us today, and some of you are repeat visitors. Thank you for being part of previous Broadband Breakfast Live online events, or even Broadband Breakfast Club events. I know some of you have been to those too. The first speaker will be Shirley Bloomfield. Shirley needs very little introduction. She is the CEO of NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, and this group serves nearly 850 independent telecommunications companies that really do lead innovation in rural and small town America. And Shirley, with all the attention and focus on IIJA, I've got to see and speak and interact with her more. I mean, her members are definitely out there. They know what's going on in rural America. And Shirley is just a real key leader in the broadband space. And I look forward to hearing more about what you care about besides infrastructure, but clearly you care about infrastructure very, very much. Let me just introduce everyone, and then we'll turn to Shirley for the first set of remarks. Following Shirley, we'll get to hear from Grant Spellmeyer. Grant, welcome. Thank you. We've had your predecessor on before, but now that you've joined and serve as the president and CEO of ACA Connects, we're so happy to welcome you to this program here with us. And ACA Connects, America's Communications Association, is a 700-member nonprofit advocacy group dedicated to serving the smaller and mid-size independent broadband, phone, and video businesses. And I want to really learn more about ACA Connects, the issues that you're dealing with, the attitude you take towards the IIJA's BEAD, or Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, as well as some of the other broadband funds that are out there. So welcome, Grant, and thank you for being with us. Following Grant, we're going to hear from Marisa Mitrovic. Marisa is the Fiber Broadband Association's Vice President of Public Policy, and she leads their efforts before Congress, as well as the White House and regulatory agencies. And the Fiber Broadband Association, again, another critical player in the landscape for broadband infrastructure. I really watch their breakfast. Either me or one of the reporters watches Fiber for Breakfast every Wednesday at 10, a couple hours before us. But so you get two breakfasts. You get Fiber for Breakfast, and then you get Broadband Breakfast on Wednesday. So don't miss that. And we're going to hear from Marisa on the experience she's brought as previously the Vice President of Federal Legislative Affairs for Frontier, as well as a Vice President of Public Policy for Verizon. So thank you, Marisa, for being with us. And then batting cleanup will be David Grossman, who is the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs for the Consumer Technology Association. And David, this is a repeat trip for you just very recently, because when we were out in Las Vegas for CES 2023, we were very fortunate to have you kind of kick off our preview of your incredible show there every year. The CES is obviously the place where the tech industry gathers, and your role at CTA includes the FCC, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and you focus, of course, on broadband spectrum policy, cybersecurity, and online competition. So we look forward to hearing your thoughts too. So Shirley, over to you. Give us your thoughts on the top issues before Congress and the administration this year.
Okay, thank you, Drew. It is such a treat to be here with you and with all of my fellow panelists. I respect all of them so much. So much happening in the industry. So as we look, you did a really nice layout of my 850 community-based providers. I would also, just painting the picture a little bit further, my companies have on average 30 employees. They serve on average 2,000 square miles, and yet about 80% of their customers have robust fiber to the home technology available. So when we think about what do we still have to do, what needs to get done, I think Congress continues to play a really critical role in this space. We have the 118th Congress just kicking off, getting organized. We also have 85 new members of Congress. That means a lot of folks who were not around for the infrastructure discussion. So I look at this next year ahead, and I think there's still some education to be done. Broadband, why it's important, what role it plays in our economic fiber of the country. I also think that there's some work to be done in terms of ensuring that this moment in time gets done right. And so when I look at the year ahead, there's a couple of things that are really top of mind for myself and certainly for NTCA. Infrastructure funding, all of the money that we're seeing, the capital projects, the Reconnect from USDA, the BEAD program coming down the pike, very exciting. We've got to make sure that gets done right. There's some things that we need to be thinking about there. Making sure the maps get done right. Don't rush it, do it right. These maps are going to be critically important. I think Congress and the administration have an obligation there, given the amount of funding. Coordinating between all of these different programs. When I think about all of the different programs and the ability to keep track of what accountability, what speeds, what different provisions they all have, looking at Congress to potentially playing a role in creating a tool that will help us better track that funding, so that 5 years from now, we're looking back and we're saying, yes, we did this right. That is, we've stayed coordinated. We've made the best out of some of these opportunities. However, with all the excitement of all of this funding coming down, the one thing that I think is really top of mind for NTCA and my member companies is thinking through where the future of universal service goes and making sure that people don't get so excited with kind of the shiny toy of a lot of federal funding that we're not also focused on some of those existing programs and reforming those programs in a way to ensure that we continue to build these networks, but they can be sustained and they can be affordable. So I look at things like that, and I think affordability continues to be key, because all of us can talk about building networks, but if at the end of the day consumers can't access and afford those networks, I'm not sure how far we've moved the ball forward on some of those things. I also think Congress can take a real leadership role, and I hope they will. In terms of smart tax policy, I think there are ways to look at things like the fact that we've got all these grant programs, and yet all of these grants for broadband are taxable. That's kind of crazy to me. That's like one hand giveth, the other hand taketh away. How do we do smart policy there? And I think there's some leaders who are stepping up in that space and thinking about some of those things. And I also think that as everybody thinks about whatever it might be, whether it's privacy or competition or cybersecurity, to have that focus on right size regulation. Everybody is not the same. Again, I've got, on average 30 employees per member company of mine. They're doing amazing things, but they don't have armies of staff like large corporations do. What can we do that is common sense approach in that space that will really move the ball forward? So I think there's a lot of things to be done. There's a way for committees that don't traditionally think about broadband to play a very critical role. Rights of way, Bureau of Land Management, the ability to get railroad crossings for broadband deployment. All of those things actually sound little, but when you put them in the big pot, they're actually significant. So again, we think all the time about what does it take to build smart rural communities? What kind of tools do we need to put in people's hands? And then to your earlier point, what are those applications and how can we create better platforms for those exciting applications that are out there? So I will just turn over my time just in the spirit of I'm anxious to hear what everybody else has to share about what they see in the days ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shirley, for giving us that overview and that perspective. Let's go right into Grant. What are some of your thoughts about the key issues before Congress and the administration?
Yeah, thank you, Drew, and exciting to be here today. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I know there's been a little bit of interference intermittently going in and out here. So let me know if that becomes a problem. I'm really excited to be here today. You gave a great background on ACA Connects, formerly the American Cable Association. We've got members in all 50 states, and I would echo a lot of what Shirley just said. And in fact, I'm going to go off my prepared script a little bit so that I don't say everything that she just said. She hit many of the issues that I plan to hit. I'm going to give you a couple of answers. The first is Senator John Thune of South Dakota put out a letter back in December to a number of carriers and trade associations focusing on a number of questions related to broadband and regulation. I think that letter is a great framework for what ACA Connects and their members care about. And as we submitted answers back to the senator, it really outlines everything that we're interested in for 2023 and the next Congress. First and foremost is broadband policy. We want to make sure that the money that's headed out into the field is not wasted and is properly targeted using good maps. Our biggest concern is that public money not displace private capital that's already been invested in many markets by many of our members. And I think, Senator Thune asked some good questions along those lines, and we will continue to try to keep the focus on that during the course of 2023. ACA Connects in the coming days is going to release an updated study that we've commissioned that will try to predict where money is going to flow amongst the 50 states based upon the most recently released set of FCC maps. So stay tuned for that. We think that'll help guide governors and policymakers in the coming months. The rest of our agenda involves a desire to see a light touch regulatory framework maintained, to continue to knock down some of the siting barriers that Shirley talked about, removing barriers to entry. My members care very much about retransmission consent and all of those issues. They're not normally seen as high-tech issues, but I think there's a lot of common some of the abuses that have gone on in the ecosystem, and we're going to continue to talk about that. I think the last thing I would really highlight for everybody is a little commercial on my own part. We are having our ACA summit in DC for the first time since the pandemic. We're doing it on March 1st and 2nd, and we're going to have a great lineup of commissioners and members of Congress and broadband officials from the federal government and the 50 states, and I would encourage everybody to visit our acaconnects.org website and check that out. And with that, I'll defer further comments so that we could get to the remaining panelists and Q&A.
Very noble of you. Thank you, Grant. And we will be there. We'll make sure to be there on March 1st and 2nd. And, it's so good to see events coming together in person, right? I mean, some of your organizations had them quite regularly, even in the midst of the pandemic, but it's definitely good to see people coming together in person. All right, with that, let's go right into Marisa. Thank you for being with us, and tell us a little bit about the Fiber Broadband Association's take on these issues.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Drew. I'm happy to represent the Fiber Broadband Association here today and be a part of this great panel. I'd just like to start off by sharing a few other things about the Fiber Broadband Association. You were so kind to talk about our Wednesday morning breakfasts. We have close to 500 members. We represent the entire fiber optic ecosystem. So we have about half of our members are broadband ISPs, and the other half represents the supply side of the industry. Our mission is to accelerate the deployment of fiber broadband networks. Imagine that, Fiber Broadband Association, and really to ensure digital equity that enables every community to leverage the economic and societal benefits that fiber broadband can deliver. We believe fiber is really the most important connectivity technology for consumers and how we're going to connect America. And, the only way this happens is if government and industry work together. Looking towards the 118th, fiber broadband members have a lot of similar priorities to what Shirley and Grant shared with everyone already. We often do align on issues. I'll start by saying, as I look to the 118th, I'm optimistic in bipartisanship. Yesterday, Chair McMorris Rogers opened up the Energy and Commerce Committee organizing meeting by touching upon the strong bipartisan history of that committee. We've seen that in the Senate Commerce Committee before as well. We've seen that when it comes to issues like the Farm Bill and agriculture, which is another priority for our membership as we look to the Reconnect program continuing to be authorized later this year. And as you mentioned, the IIJA, now Shirley says we have new members, so education is absolutely critical. And, a little plug, Fiber Broadband Association will be doing a Fiber Day on the Hill on March 29th, where we hope to show people just what goes into deploying fiber broadband, why it's important, what fiber is, enabling in communities, and even teaching people how to splice fiber, which I'll touch upon more when we talk hopefully about workforce opportunities. Equity is a huge priority for the membership. The affordable connectivity funding, we're not sure when that's running out. Certainly our membership plans to engage. We want to work with lawmakers and the administration to find a viable path forward on that issue. I think really those are kind of some of the top priorities, and then permitting. Another issue I've been having conversations with staff related to how do we look at some of the issues when it comes to deployment, making sure that all of this broadband money, this grant funding, and private capital and investment can really go to use and be made use in the best, most efficient, effective way possible. And that means we're going to need to put our heads together on timelines and how that works at every level. So, that's another top priority. I think that's something we saw Republicans at the end of last Congress introduce in the House, some permitting legislation. I think that also matches up with Democrat priorities to effectively get the broadband funding out the door. And I'm optimistic and hopeful that there will be some bipartisan proposals that come out of committees that touch on this issue, and that can be passed into law and, passed and signed into law. So I look forward to the rest of the conversation. I know we have one more panelist to, give his introduction, but thank you so much again for having me.
Thank you, Marisa. And let's go right into David. Give us your thoughts on Congress and these issues that it will face.
Well, Drew, thank you so much for having me back. Just a month since my last appearance with Broadband Breakfast, finished up just a few weeks ago with a phenomenally successful CES. I think most folks are aware of who we are, the Consumer Technology Association, but I always like to start by reminding folks that we are the largest tech trade association in North America with over 1,500 member companies. While you may know us or think of us for some of our larger company names, 80% of CTA's membership are small businesses. And that really is on display at CES, where we had an impressive over 2 million net square feet of show space and over 3,200 companies. And we'll get back to that, I think, That's an important point when we talk about competition policy. I share Maurice's optimism for bipartisanship in this Congress, and I thought I would touch on 4 issues. There are far more that we can talk about, but 4 in particular. First is on privacy. I think it's very clear that a patchwork of 50 state laws is not workable. It's burdensome, particularly for startups, confusing for consumers. So we need a federal, nationwide privacy law. We came very close in the last Congress, and it came together because of bipartisanship. And so optimistic that we will see something come together again this year. There's some changes that we feel are critical for that bill to be successful. One of them is real preemption, preemption with an asterisk where you say preemption, but these state laws or local regulations are going to remain in effect, is not preemption. And similarly, private right of action is hugely detrimental to the industry and to innovation. So those are things that we'll be advocating for when it comes to privacy legislation. Second, on cybersecurity, certainly the proliferation of IoT devices has changed our world and introduced new vectors. So we need to be thinking about how to effectively promote secure connected devices, avoid introducing vulnerabilities into our nation's wireless networks, and keep the U.S. as a global leader and innovator. Our industry is doing a lot in this space. And so when it comes to government, it's about embracing a light touch regulatory approach, fostering industry-driven best practices for consumer device cybersecurity, not mandates, creatively partnering with the private sector to improve consumer IoT security, looking at legal safe harbors for companies that choose to use certifications or labeling that the government might want to encourage. And then, of course, harmonizing standards and expectations both domestically and internationally. Third, and I think this is one that all of the panelists share, is around broadband access and spectrum issues. For us, tech neutrality is critical, and it's our approach we take to broadband, recognizing that there are benefits of fiber, fixed wireless, satellite, and traditional mobile. And when it comes to spectrum policy, we take a balanced approach, recognizing the benefits of both the benefits of both licensed and unlicensed, as well as hybrid models. And again, related to spectrum, we were heartened to see that the Spectrum Auction Authority, the FCC, was not allowed to lapse in December and had a short-term extension into mid-March. But that's just right around the corner, and we need to see that reauthorized on a long-term basis. And then the last issue, and this is a huge one to the future of our industry, and that's competition and antitrust. You know, going back to what I said about CES, and that really being a showcase and a platform for American startups and innovators and entrepreneurs. We have Eureka Park, which is an area of the CES show floor dedicated to startups. Startups are born with a passion and drive of entrepreneurs to create something new. But of course, startup investors have a different priority. They're focused on getting a return on investment. So when it comes to some of the bills in Congress, we have been vocal in our opposition to a tax on the tech industry. We think that they are misplaced, perhaps driven by a fundamental misunderstanding of how the tech industry works. The reality, again, I point back to CES. You walk the show floor, there's no one single company dominated. There are hundreds of thousands of companies showcasing a variety of different technologies and subsectors within tech, from smart home appliances, smartphones, TVs, robotics, automotive, AI, and list goes on. So happy to get into that issue in more detail. I'll leave it at that.
Well, wonderful. We've got some great questions from the audience. We want to invite you to keep them coming. I'm actually going to build on one of those audience questions. My first question, and this is from Mike Dunn: with so much money on offer for broadband infrastructure, I'm interested to hear from everyone on the value of different entities, from the states to the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, to being, quote, technology neutral. And Mike asks, if we're spending a generational amount of money on broadband, we should be spending that, shouldn't we, on technology that doesn't need to be upgraded, replaced in 5 to 10 years? So obviously, two of you have already kind of spoken to this. You know, you want to be tech neutral, David, Marisa. Fiber broadband's in the name. You're going to advocate for fiber. Let's start with Shirley and Grant on the tech neutrality issue and whether that's a helpful or a hurtful buzzword.
So I'll just jump in here, Drew. I do think it's going to take every tool in the toolkit, right? I mean, even in TCA, while I take some difference of opinion when people are like, oh, 5G is the answer for rural America. And I'm like, oh my gosh, by the time you put up a tower every 500 feet, you're creating all kinds of infrastructure you don't need. But I do think spectrum is important. And I think as long as people keep in mind that wireless technology actually does need a fiber backbone. So I never want to be the one to rule out the fact that there's going to be different circumstances. They're going to be geographic, it's going to be demographic, it's going to be all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, I couldn't agree more that we have this opportunity. And frankly, shame on us if we don't actually put in future-proof technology the first time around, where and when we can. I think we've learned a lot about how we use technology. And I think about 4 years ago, if I talked about symmetrical speeds, people would be like, people don't need symmetrical upload, download. Yeah, they do. And we use it. And we use it a lot. And it's growing. So I think acknowledging that I think is really important. The other thing that I think about in that space is that, people will be like, well, it's expensive, but, think about what it takes to run a rural network. And actually, it's an area of expertise for us. It's expensive. And part of it is the OpEx. It is the truck rolls. It is what my guys call windshield time. It is when you've got to go out and you've got to check a line that is 100 miles out. The other beauty of fiber that people don't really recognize is how much it lowers that OpEx, which as we think about affordability, we think about sustainability, is also really key. So it's not just grabbing a flash toy. It is saying, here is a technology that offers that better capacity, speed, and lower OpEx. So again, where it can be done, I absolutely think programs like Reconnect have been interestingly leading the way. And that's what's, to me, is so fascinating, that USDA is actually putting higher standards on than some of the other agencies that really, probably people will think of more in terms of the technology space. And I think kudos to them for jumping in there that way.
Thanks, Shirley. That was great perspective. Grant, I'm dying to hear what you have to say on this.
Yeah, so a couple of things. I am blessed to have members who use a variety of different technologies to deliver broadband. I've got coaxial fiber or coaxial cable networks. I've got traditional wireline networks. I've got some people using fixed wireless, and I've got a lot of people using fiber, especially in new build scenarios. And each of those, it's going to be the job of the 50 governors and the providers to sort out what the best technology is to use. What's really neat about the study that I referenced that we're going to release in the next couple of days is that based upon our calculations, we think, and the number of projections of the number of unserved and underserved people in the country, We think that the combination of the $42.5 billion coming from NTIA, along with a private sector matching component that's required under the law, is more than enough in almost every state to deliver a lot of fiber to a lot of places. After that, it'll be up to governors to decide how they want to approach the allocation of funding. But I think a whole lot of governors can deliver a whole lot of fiber. And then there will be opportunities. I came from the wireless industry. There will be opportunities in very high cost areas for wireless to play a role as well.
Marisa, David, do you want to add anything briefly to this discussion of opinions on this?
I can jump in, David.
No, go right ahead, and I'll jump after you.
Sure. I just wanted to say, I really appreciate, a lot of the points that Shirley made, is really important. And I just want to reiterate that this is, the question that came in, this is generational. We want to make the best use of this money. We are trying to get to the places that don't have access to internet, that don't have broadband, where there hasn't been as much private capital invested to date. And we want to make sure everyone has the same access to the same services. And so it is important to invest in fiber, being the backbone, being the critical infrastructure that also powers other technologies that are important, 5G, for example. So, but I do think, we certainly encourage a look at the investment in fiber to, this last mile especially, and really think what might be a little bit more investment on the front end is going to really save money in the long run and create opportunity, whether it's through jobs, health, access to healthcare, access to education. And so that's very important to the Fiber Broadband Association, and something we think about a lot.
Well, I read that to be a lot of pro fiber, right? I mean, there may be a little bit of couching. Why don't you just jump in, David? What is the value of the tech neutrality phrase and label?
Yeah, so I come at this from a couple different perspectives. I mean, one, we have member companies doing deployment in all of those different technologies. We have traditional large telcos, we have a large cable operator, we have wireless carriers as members. We also have traditional tech companies who are doing lower Earth orbit satellite constellations, and we have companies. Starry is a great example of a CTA member doing fixed wireless. And then, of course, the second perspective I come is all of the online services that depend on high-speed connectivity. And from that perspective, it doesn't matter what technology is delivering it into the home or business. It's about the experience that person gets. They want a flawless experience. They don't want buffering when it comes to a streaming service. And so, we will look to whatever technology can deliver that, and agree with the point Shirley said. It's going to depend on, geographically what part you're talking about, urban, rural. Every community is going to have different needs. I did want to take issue with one point about, and agree, first of all, that absolutely wireless networks start with fiber connectivity to make them work. But there are a number of spectrum bands and frequencies that don't necessarily require towers every 500 feet. And we've seen that. TV white spaces is a good example of where we've seen rural deployments where a tower can cover a much larger radius that could be particularly ideal. But again, no disagreement that it starts with a wired connection to that tower.
Starts with fiber, absolutely. All right, so I want to talk about broadband for a little bit more, and then we'll broaden to some of those other issues. So let's talk about both infrastructure, like how we get the funding out, and kind of sustainability through Universal Service Fund, Affordability Connectivity Fund. I want to piggyback on Steve Pastorkovich. Sorry for the pronunciation there. Steve's great question just now. NTIA said to get bulk broadband fabric challenges by January 13th for BEAD purposes, and many scrambled to do so. Now the FCCC says there's a March 15th deadline. Can any of you offer clarification on the broadband mapping conundrum that we always seem to be experiencing? Tomorrow's Groundhog Day, so maybe we'll have this again, right? But please enlighten us on what should happen on the challenges that need to take place on the map, the fabric with the addresses, and then the availability points on that map. And whoever wants to go first, please jump in.
Shirley, why don't you go first? I've got a couple thoughts, but you spoke earlier about taking the time to get it done right.
Yeah, so a couple of things that I would just throw out without us getting down into the nitty gritty on mapping, because we could just talk for 5 days on mapping, right, everybody? But a couple of things that I think are really important to kind of highlight. This first tranche, this June deadline, is really to determine the allocations for each state. So it is really important, but it is actually not the build. It is, will Tennessee get 900 million? Will they get $1 billion? It is, so it's really determining a lot of the allocations. So before we all go into full panic mode on this, but I do think that there are some really important steps that need to take place. I think we need to make sure that this fabric that has been put out there is properly vetted, that it is challenged, and that it is settled. I think there's a lot of work to be done there. And it's one of the reasons why we just keep talking about the ability to have a challenge process. I also think that ISPs are going to have the opportunity, and I think communities will get involved in this process as well, to be, that ISPs will need to have the opportunity to file coverage data. What are they seeing with respect to what they think is settled and where they provide coverage? And I think NTIA and the states are going to have to come together and conduct a further challenge process with respect to these coverage data claims that are submitted by providers. I think there's some very, very important steps. I know on one hand, the agency is very anxious to move, very anxious to get this money out the door. I continue to think it's still worth taking the time to make sure we do it right. So instead of focusing on when in third or fourth quarter 2023 can we get the money out the door, let's make sure that what we're seeing on a map is not actually my guys have locations that have showed up as multi-unit dwellings that are boulders or RV sales parking lots. I mean, let's be smart about this, because again, it's that look back. I always think about it in terms of who wants to be in front of an oversight hearing in front of Congress 4 years from now trying to explain some of these things. So again, I think the challenge process is important. But keep in perspective that this first go around is really for state allocations. It is not the round that will really then determine where is that unserved and underserved. So that's my 2 cents for a quick response.
So, sorry, Drew, I talked over you there.
Go ahead, please go.
Couple of things. As I spoke in my intro, my members' number one concern is about overbuilding of existing private capital. Getting the maps right is crucial to avoiding that. We all know the maps aren't quite ready yet, and that process is going to play out over the course of time, as Shirley indicated, and I agree with her suggested approach, so that later this year we will have a much better set of maps. And I believe under the law, those maps need to then control. I have begun to hear a bit of rumbling about the fact that there's a number of states that want to diverge and go off and do their own mapping and set up a whole nother layer of maps that will layer on top of the FCC map. Policymakers in Washington, in Congress, and at NTIA and the FCC have to make sure that doesn't happen. I think it's inconsistent with the law. We're going to continue to advocate that to NTIA. And I hope they make the right call on that. So once we get through this set of maps, hopefully we can avoid having states continuing to duplicate maps going forward.
Well, I mean, I do have to point out, though, Grant, that it's always been permitted within the rules for states to have their own maps and to be able to have their own process for checking and allocating for their decisions within the state. So, yes, yeah. The failures and the difficulties that the FCC has experienced may be elevating that discussion, but I don't think it's ever been outside the realm of the statute. Do you want to react?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure I'm in 100% agreement on that. I'm not a practicing lawyer anymore, so I defer to some of my counsel on that. Obviously, there's an opportunity for the states to make some judgments, but we cannot, after spending all this time and effort, find ourselves in a situation where a state says, I think that Bethesda, Maryland is totally unserved, and I'm going to send all the money to Bethesda. That just can't be allowed to happen. And I don't think it's consistent with the law. And if it is, then we should change the law.
Okay. I want to make sure to give others a chance, but let's broaden the discussion to some of these issues about sustainability through Affordable Connectivity Fund and through the Universal Service Fund. Do Marisa or David, do you want to weigh in on mapping or adoption of broadband issues here quickly?
Sure. Just on the mapping point, I will say that, I do agree that, FBA members agree and support the federal mapping efforts. A lot of money is going into this process. We've had a lot of support from policymakers on getting these maps right. There's our the ISP members in our organization have spent a lot of time working on this. The communities are spending a lot of time working on this as well. We should, so we do support using these maps, but we also support getting them right and agree that that is very important. So that is my thinking on maps for FBA's membership. Go ahead.
All right. David, maps or universal service?
I don't have much to add here. So CTA has a long-standing position that we do not advocate for federal funding of any kind. So these issues around the funding piece are just not something we engage on, but we're of course supportive of all efforts to expand deployment and adoption.
Well, for the rest of you, I mean, could you speak to Shirley's point about making sure that the contributions are not inevitably always going against a technology, voice telephone service that's not really being used? There's a lot of discussion about the sustainability of the Universal Service Fund. Obviously, Affordable Connectivity Fund ramped that up because it now grants, up to, is it $30 or $35 a month for a subsidization of broadband. So Shirley and Grant and Marisa, what are some of your thoughts on how this thing gets sorted out? Is this a Congress matter or is this for the FCC?
Shirley?
Well, yeah, go ahead, Grant.
I'm sorry, you're the universal service expert amongst the group, so I'm going to defer to you on some of those issues, but there obviously is a stability problem there that needs to be fixed, and the FCC's been out seeking comment on that, and once they have a fully seated commission, I think they come back around to that. And it's important stuff because these networks, whatever their historic origin, will need to be supported and maintained over time. And so that's an issue. I was going to go, Drew, to the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is the one that I am concerned about. And I'll let Shirley talk about the USF side. That program runs out of money next year, middle of the year. I've started to hear some predictions that say it's first quarter of the year. That means that we're 12 months away from a real problem there. There are, if I have the statistics right from the chairwoman the other day, there are 16 million households, 55 million Americans relying on that program right now. And there just was a GAO thing about, some concerns about waste, fraud, and abuse in the program that need to be addressed. But clearly Congress is going to run into a question of significant funding need just at the same time as the money starts to roll out for broadband. So I think it's an issue that we'll be back here in the coming quarters talking about.
Okay, Shirley.
Okay, first of all, can I just say that the folks that are on with us have the best questions I have seen in a long time. I know it's not all universal service, but there's some great questions coming through that I think you've got your breakfast, your broadband discussion for the next 2 months set. But I will say this on universal service. I actually think the FCC does have the authority to deal with it. They've chosen not to at this point. That is one of the reasons why it's going to be really important for Congress to engage, because if universal service, something goes awry, whether it's the court case being in the Fifth Circuit that currently has a case that questions what the FCC's role is in this program, or some other things, that's a flash cut to consumers. On average, we're trying to do the estimation, but in a lot of rural cases, what we've seen from our analysis is it would cost people more than $200 a month to receive the service that they now receive, because of the 96 Act codifying that all Americans, regardless of where they live, should have access to comparable and affordable services. So that becomes a huge issue. Then you layer on top of that healthcare access, schools and library access, all of those other things that we have come to depend on. And as Grant noted, the affordability component as well. So I think we look at the number of entities that have built business models based on the ability to reach consumers through that broadband connectivity. It says to me, we got to think about broadening that contribution base. What does that look like? And I think the contribution concerns in general. So I think there's a lot to be done. You've seen leaders like John Thune, Amy Klobuchar, really stepping up on this issue. I think more to come, hopefully, in the days ahead.
I want to make sure to save some time for some of these quick answer questions, but as one more additional topic, I think most of us could weigh in on is privacy legislation. Okay. And so that was the number one point you mentioned, David. There's a lot of discussion about how Congress didn't get over the finish line on this subject last year, even though there's a lot of bipartisan interest on it. I'm wondering what you and the other panelists think about privacy legislation's feasibility. Is it something that really is a priority or not a priority? And, is it going to get kind of jumbled in with some of these other tech issues, including net neutrality, including Section 230 and others? So, David, let's let you answer that one first.
Yeah, and I'll also combine, as I'm looking at questions in the chat box, someone had asked about why the optimism on bipartisanship. And I think this is a good test case or example to use of why I actually do have optimism about getting something done. And it's because of the topic. I mean, my former boss, Congresswoman Anna Eshoo, always talks about privacy being in the American DNA. And it's so true. I mean, maybe it's not a dinner table conversation, but it's something that everyone holds dear. Related around data breaches. People have seen what happens when sensitive information is revealed or leaked. So it's something everybody can relate to, both sides of the aisle. And I think that was reflected in the fact that we got to a three corners bill last year with the House and Senate Energy and Commerce and Senate Commerce. Some new players this year, obviously, in the Senate now, the new Senate Commerce ranking member, Cruz, and then in the House, parties have flipped, but it is still McMorris, Rogers, and Pallone. So I think there is a real interest. There's certainly a need for it. And I think also, the pressure of FTC action, which we certainly would prefer the congressional route than seeing the FTC take this on without the sufficient legal authority. That's why I'm optimistic.
Grant, Shirley, Marisa, are your organizations supportive, not supportive, or doesn't part of your agenda at all? Privacy, Grant.
We're certainly supportive of a federal framework adopted by Congress that includes state preemption. David's right. We got close last time. I know it will come up again soon. Senator Cantwell mentioned it just the other day to me. So we'll be there, and hopefully we can get it a little further than we did last time.
And
Shirley,
I would just add, this is not high up on our list. I just think that, one of the ways we look at it is making sure that there's a national standard and uniform approach that really treats all online data consistently. I think that, looking for that consistency so consumers know what their expectations are. But otherwise, this is, we've got too many other irons in the fire right now.
All right. I'm going to read off a list of about 5 questions, and then I'm going to go through each of the 4 of you and give you a chance to reply to the ones most relevant to you. So get your pads of paper ready. So number 1, when will dollars start to flow on broadband infrastructure? Number 2, are we going to see more of a shortage of fiber? Clearly, there has been a shortage. Are we going to see more of a shortage of fiber? Number 3, there's been so much talk on last mile networks. There's almost been none on the middle mile. There's $1 billion, a measly $1 billion out of a pool of 42.5 going to middle mile. Is this a problem that we should be talking about? Are there other things to do besides dollars? Are there any policy issues? Question number 4, there's not been discussion in this discussion about multiple dwelling units, even though 25% of residents live in MDUs. How do we address the digital divide if we're not also tackling and addressing multiple dwelling units? And question number 5, do any of you have thoughts on the questions of the match, the 25% match funding that's required for the broadband equity access and deployment program? Is that going to be met? Is it a positive? Is it a negative? There's more. I haven't even covered all the questions that our audience has raised, but these are 5 of them, and they're great ones, and I'd love your thoughts. So let's go in the same order we started, and this will be your last chance. So Shirley, Grant, Marisa, and David.
Okay, I'll be super speedy. So number 1, money flow. I'm going to put my money in terms of BEAD. See, I have a helper today. I'm going to put my money on the BEAD coming out first quarter of 2024. There is money flowing. And so I think it's for people to keep that in mind. Capital funds are flowing. Reconnect is flowing. There is money flowing. It's a steady drumbeat. Second, fiber shortage. That has been huge. And we've talked about it before about fiber's the new toilet paper. I will tell you on average, my guys have stockpiled about a year's worth of fiber. So thank goodness they were kind of thinking ahead. Exciting news to come from NTCA, working with Corning in a couple of weeks, but we have been aggressively addressing where we can find some ways to ensure that rural providers who don't have the scope and scale that a Verizon or AT&T do have the ability to access some of that technology when and where they need it to complete these builds. That also is going to mean that some of the rules around the fact that these have to be new purchases and can't be inventory purchases have to be more lenient from some of these federal agencies. 3, middle mile, holy cow, that should have more funding. Absolutely. Watch how that was so oversubscribed, and the ability to connect these networks in a reasonable, thoughtful, affordable way. Absolutely. It's one of the reasons I am very bullish about the power of state fiber networks that my guys have created across the country for that same purpose, to find that scope and scale and easier, more costly, more cost-effective transport. MDUs, I can't speak to that. I don't have a ton of that in rural America, but to me, that leads to the question of, isn't there an opportunity to do more work in inclusion and digital education and the ability to bring more people online? I immediately pivot that way, but it's really sweet to huge high rises because we don't have a ton of those in my guys' area. And in terms of, I can't remember. So the matching funding concerns, no. You know what? My folks are I think there's a lot to be said for the fact that if you're looking to get this kind of support from the government, you got to put a little skin in the game. I'm kind of a big fan of that. I did that with my kids forever. You want that new toy? Here, use your allowance to pay for half of it. I think it shows a commitment. I think it shows some transparency in the transaction. And frankly, that is an area that I hear very, very little about from the carriers that I represent.
Thank you. What would you like to add, Grant?
Yeah, in the interest of time, I see we're up against the hour. I'm gonna answer the Jeopardy question or the Price is Right question by going with the second quarter of 2024, just in the hopes of being more accurate than Shirley. There is a fiber shortage. It probably gets marginally worse, especially when demand rises in the coming years. Middle mile is a big problem. MDUs are uniquely suited to be served by cable companies, and my members, I think, do a good job at that. I would cite ACP as a prime concern for people trying to serve MDUs. 25% match is not a problem.
Grant, just in the interest of giving you something else to say, though, what are ways that MDUs can be better served by BEAD funding? Can they be? Are there?
Well,
I mean, are they to do more of that?
Are they served? Are they unserved? Are they underserved? I don't think we've got a good accounting of that yet from the FCC maps and the challenge process. I think you're going to find that those are not the areas most in need of broadband networks. I think you will find that there certainly are some places out there, but they're more likely to be served because of the density. Density is what drives people to come out and serve. The match, I think if you look to our study that comes out, you'll see that we project the match overall on average will exceed 25%.
When is your report coming out, Grant?
I think as soon as Friday of this week. It's either Friday or Monday.
And any final remarks you'd like to make? Because Shirley did such a. All right.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here and great discussion.
Marisa, David, feel free to add anything and add any additional quick points you'd like to add of key priorities for your organizations before Congress this year.
Great. Thanks so much. Yeah, agree with Grant and Shirley on most of these things. Although let's just say, I mean, I think it'll be the first or second quarter next year when the BEAD funding comes out. Middle mile, very, very important, and agree that we need more money there and funding. The 25% match, something that our members also, have acknowledged is part of, what makes a public-private partnership work. And I will just say, I'll leave you with back to David's optimism, why I'm optimistic about broadband policies and being addressed in a bipartisan way in the 118th Congress is because these are the issues that impact every single American, and they're not a partisan issue. Everyone needs access to affordable, reliable broadband. And so thank you for having me today.
Well, thank you for being here and for giving Fiber Broadband Association's perspective. David, you have the last opportunity to speak here.
Yes, sir. Well, I'll touch on workforce issues because I know you wanted to talk about it and we didn't get to that. But from our perspective there's several things that Congress could be focusing on. One is high-skilled immigration. Almost half of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs are immigrants. We need to modernize our immigration system. So increasing the number of H-1B visas, supporting the international entrepreneur rule, instituting a startup visa program. We'd also like to encourage more industry apprenticeships, particularly in the tech space. And I just would also point out increasingly tech companies are removing requirements like requiring college degrees for some roles, which creates an opportunity for greater and diverse entry points into the tech space. So grateful for the opportunity to have participated on behalf of CTA, and look forward to doing it again soon.
Thank you again, everyone. On behalf of our great panelists, Shirley Bloomfield, Grant Spellmeyer, Marisa Mitrovich, and David Grossman, I'm Drew Clark of Broadband Breakfast. We'll see you next Wednesday.